Welcome and thanks for tuning in for another episode of AWSP TV. We are so excited to have in our studios today Ben Ibale from WA. Ben is a good friend of mine and we've been doing a lot of work the last few years together, and I twisted his arm to come join us in the studio today. Thanks for being here, Ben.
Yeah, no problem.
So Ben, why don't we start with what we're here for?
Okay.
So I told you we're going to talk about culturally responsive school leadership. So let's just, our audience knows that's what we're going to be talking about today, but before we get there, let's hear a little bit about your background, your journey. How did you end up here?
Well, I'd have to say first thank you to my dad, because he joined the U.S. Coast Guard from the Philippines roughly right around 1970, 71. And so that's my immigration story, because I was born in 1970. And so, and he paved the way for us in White Center, Washington. So I was away from my father for 5 years, and then my mother for a few years. And then I arrived in Seattle in 1975. And so I was an ELL student, and that's why the story, that journey starts, because they didn't have ELL during that time period. And so I ended up just going into elementary school, middle school, and high school at Beverly Park, Cascade Middle School, and Evergreen High School. And that's kind of where I learned a great appreciation for English and the public school system. And so I wanted to give it back, because I saw things impact me negatively, and I wanted to make some changes. And so that's why I became a high school English teacher. And I taught for about 7 years in the Issaquah School District, which was sharply different from, let's say, White Center, Evergreen High School. And so that's where I truly understood that term social justice was just really coming to fruition, the opportunity gap, the achievement gap, back in the early 90s when I went to CLU for my master's in teaching. But I did get my undergrad from the University of Washington, hence the purple and gold.
You had to throw that in.
Yeah, well, I'm surprised you aren't repping your alma mater there, Mr. Coog. But anyways, so I ended up at CLU for my master's in teaching, and then I went into Issaquah. But then I had an opportunity with the NEA through a internship. It was a UniServe internship, kind of a UniServe director who represents a lot of the collective bargaining agreements issues, bargaining, grievances. And I ended up being in Seattle. And I was there for about 6 years as a UniServe director for Seattle Education Association. And that's where my eyes really opened up on the issues of equity, social justice, because during that time there were probably about 115 different programs and buildings. And there's a sharp difference, the same sharp difference between Issaquah and White Center as far as socioeconomics. Regionally was different, but here's you have one district where, depending on north or south of the Ship Canal, you saw impact of resources, impact of kind of poverty, quality of schools when it comes to different support and resources. And so that's where I learned what it truly meant to understand the different cultures of each building, because that's the culture of the building, I truly believe, has the most significant impact, and those who create the culture or abdicate the culture, that's where I saw kind of my work in trying to understand how can we shape that school culture and climate effectively with collaboration from SEA, the Seattle School District administration, and the building leadership from all those different groups, including, you know, your paraprofessionals, your CERTs, even your bus drivers and custodian staff, and how they work collectively together, because they already know how to function separately, because they're just trying to survive and do the same daily work that they know how to do. But it's creating that culture where everybody's kind of on that same vision and that same understanding to put, you know, student learning and relationship building with students the priority. So that's kind of what I learned about coming in as an ELL student and coming in as a teacher, and now working with creating professional development training around culturally responsive strategies, human and civil rights, through WA resources.
Right, and here you are today, representing the WA, drinking out of that cool AWSP mug. partnering with us because, I mean, let's just talk about the elephant in the room. The system needs some healing. And
Absolutely.
we have to be willing to come together and have everyone put down their swords and shields or whatever you want and have a common purpose and start collaborating around what's best for kids. So I really appreciate you coming today to talk to us, and we're hoping this is a video resource for people all across the state who are dealing with a culture that's either super toxic or incredibly positive or somewhere in the middle in that continuum. So let's do it.
All right.
So let's start with the first piece. When you think about the term culturally responsive, so in education, we're famous for our ed jargon. What would be a basic definition for somebody out there who's watching this, who's maybe heard that term and is like, oh, that must be a new buzzword? What's culturally responsive mean?
Well, for me, it's to understand the journey, because it's so complicated, because most folks try to have one definition and say, hey, I know what cultural competency means. It means to be multicultural. It means to have multicultural instruction and curriculum and adapting to the needs and cultures and backgrounds of my students. But to me, the best definition is kind of wrapped up in two things. One is there's a definition out there by Gary Howard. It says the will and skill to create effective and authentic relationships across difference. And so to me, the reason why, it's more of why. Why do you want to have a definition for cultural competency? Well, the reason is you've got to have the will and skill to create effective and authentic relationships across differences. So it's basically, it's around the idea of building relationships. How do you do it effectively across differences based off of sexual orientation, socioeconomics, gender, ethnicity, language, also your indigenous populations. So all these differences that you and I belong to, how do we become more effective across those differences? And so I love that definition because it gives you the why. But as far as how you get there, to me, how you get there is the framework around awareness, knowledge, skills, and advocacy. So that comes from Dr. Daryl Wing-Sue and also my friend and colleague, Dr. Caprice Hollins, where first you have to be kind of self-aware. And as a principal or an educator, you have to be aware that when you enter a room, there's an impact visually. There's an impact both visually from you entering the room and you seeing who's in the room, based off of race, based off of stereotypes, based off of all the things in your mind that's created this world perspective. So the idea of being aware of those things is really critical. If you're not aware of those social group categories that you're going to have natural biases towards, especially as men, then you're starting off on the wrong foot. That's why you got to first start with awareness, self-awareness, where your biases come from, your preferences, right? So the more that you're aware about that, the more inclusive you are in understanding other, right? Because then, so that's awareness, self-awareness, because then the other piece is knowledge, and that is increasing knowledge of other, all those other social group categories that I just explained to you. And so as far as a principal leader or educator leader, you've got to know the cultures and backgrounds and movements in your region, so you understand why you have a Marshallese population in Spokane, why you have Ukrainian populations in Kent or in Vancouver, and all the immigration movements, so that you have a better understanding of what that student is potentially experiencing as an ELL student, and so that knowledge of other, right? So you put yourself in situations where you learn about other. And then skills, that's where you get the skills for whether it's PBIS, whether it's, for my generation, love and logic, right? Classroom discipline, because oftentimes we jump to skills before we go through awareness and knowledge, because you want to focus on the technical skills of teaching. In reality, you have to go first through awareness and knowledge, because the last phase of that is advocacy. Advocacy is advocating for those that differ from you, right? And so that's when you can begin to advocate for that special needs student who has a student with autism, right? Or that student that's going through trauma. How can you advocate when you don't have self-awareness of yourself and your impact on that social group category, if you don't even have knowledge of that social group category, but yet you think you have the skills, right, to advocate for that student when you haven't gone through the awareness knowledge first. So to wrap it all up, just the idea that those are all choices you make. Those are daily choices to either have self-awareness, increase your knowledge of that student by putting yourself in experiences where you're going to learn more and be more self-reflective, and then the skills necessary to be effective across those differences in order to truly advocate. So if you saw as those 4 areas as choices that you put yourself into those places where you're going to be more effective and increasing your awareness, your knowledge of the skills necessary to be effective across those differences, and then to be able to truly advocate. And because we all go into teaching thinking that we're advocates. When I came out of Seattle University and University of Washington, I thought I was going to change the world. You know, I was going to pick up the starfish and throw back each one, right? Mm-hmm. When in reality, what if that starfish wanted to stay in the sand? And I'm just thinking, no, the ocean's good for you right now. No, I just came from the ocean. I want to stay here. To me, that's what it means to be culturally responsive, is to understand that journey, and that's ongoing, that it's never going to end, and there's going to be places of discomfort, and you have to go towards that discomfort, right? And so it's much more complex than just simply understanding, yeah, I'm culturally competent.
Mm-hmm. Well, what a great definition to start us off. I mean, those are 4 huge buckets. Mm-hmm. So when you think about the changing demographics in our state, mm-hmm. our students' demographics are rapidly changing. Mm-hmm. The ranks of the teachers and principals, not so much, mm-hmm. especially the principal level. We still have a predominantly white population of principals in the state. Mm-hmm. So when you think about your role in traveling all over the state and working in schools, you can walk through the front door of a school and feel the culture right away. Mm-hmm. You've probably seen good, bad, and ugly. Mm-hmm. And we believe that a principal sets the tone for a school through leadership and the culture that they create, and most often the culture they inherit. Mm-hmm. is what they begin working with. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the key role principals play in culturally responsive leadership. Mm-hmm. So if you think about the research on the Wallace from the Wallace Foundation, that mm-hmm. we all know that teachers are the #1 influence on student learning, highly effective teachers. Mm-hmm. The #2 influence is a highly effective principal. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they've been watching so far, and they got one great takeaway right out of the chute. Mm-hmm. Look in the mirror first. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What would be the next step?
Mm-hmm. So I think that first step is definitely looking in the mirror, and I would re-emphasize that constant reflection, that constant understanding of yourself. Not just your, race and ethnicity and language, but also style. Because your communication style, whether you're direct or you've got your different types of personalities and leadership styles. If you have a staff predominantly considerates, which a lot of our elementary school staff, from what we've done in PD, there's a lot of considerate staff, then analytical, and then you've also got the really engaging kind of extroverted staff too. But I think understanding that style is really important as part of that awareness piece. That knowledge piece is, I think, for a brand new principal is really critical, is fully understanding your staff. And I understand that, just like you have students that are carried over from one grade to another, you get intel on staff all the time coming in. I would encourage you to read that intel, but have a tabula rasa clean slate, and do one-on-ones. As a union advocate and union representative, we believe in one-on-one relationship building.
Yeah.
And so if you could take time to truly understand the why of every single staff member, from the bus drivers to the food service providers to the custodial staff to the to the front office desk, to your SLPs, to your nurses, to your certs, and all of the others. Spend, 5 to 10 minutes just getting to know the staff and understanding their strengths and their whys. That's going to paint a whole different picture, because just like any, we're with the Seattle Seahawks, right? Go Hawks, right? You've got amazing staff there that have created a culture where that culture will eat anything for breakfast, right? And that comes from Dr. Anthony Muhammad. Because if you have a toxic culture, that's going to eat you for breakfast. Culture will outlive you. So I think in order to change culture, it's not about top down. It's about relationship building. It's understanding the why. Why is it toxic? What has happened? Because I can tell you a lot of the toxic cultures are basically defensive responses to the bureaucracy and the constant lack of resources, to the constant fear. Here's the greatest fear that I've seen over the past 2 years. The greatest fear of our educators right now is the fear of failure. I have these kids that need me, and I know they need me, and I can't provide it. That's why they're overwhelmed with all these new initiatives and all these new demands, and then you throw on top of that salaries. My why disappears, because then what replaces that is survival. And so when you're in that constant imbalance, there was a mindfulness study published in 2017-18 that said half of all teachers, 50% of all teachers and educators around the United States believe in this statement. And that statement is, the disappointments and challenges and failures involved in this school aren't worth it. So if that is the culture of your staff, because of what's been done unto it, because of the fear of failure, and they see students failing and they don't know how to help them because of the constant overwhelming amount of expectations, you've created a failing public school system in multiple areas. Honestly, there are schools that are doing amazing, and I can reference them very easily. But as far as the overwhelming cultures that are out there that are really challenging, I think the greatest solution to that is to flip it and build those relationship pieces to combat the bureaucracy piece. So
starting over.
Yes.
So starting over with relationship building, one-on-ones, focus groups. What are some other strategies for a principal that's watching this right now who maybe stepped into a toxic culture?
Yeah. To me, one of the things to do is what you just said, is to do some focus groups. I think sharing focus group data, that's one thing that Dr. Yelena Padish from the University of Washington and myself have been doing and measuring, is understanding the culture and climate from two perspectives. One is from the community-based perspective, and the other is from the student focus groups perspective, where we just have conversations and record the conversations, transcribe them, and then share them with staff, so that they can see the different perspectives around these issues and opinions and thoughts about the challenges within that school culture and climate, because then that's their data. It's not data that's coming from another place, another district, or from Washington, D.C., or for even Olympia. This is our students, this is what our community is saying, and this is what our staff is saying. So I think facilitating those opportunities, because one of those things that I really want to emphasize is that the principal should help facilitate hope and resiliency with staff. Because we know that the research out there around the greatest predictor towards graduation is not a test score, but it's the resiliency of a student, the ability to get back up when they fall. So the only way to increase hope and resiliency in students is to actually build meaningful, caring adult relationships. So we know that that's a charge for our educators, for adults. But there's also research out there through the Gallup poll that says if you want student engagement, you've got to have teacher engagement. And how do they measure teacher engagement in that Gallup poll? There's two ways. One is the support and loyalty to the employer. So basically the educator's loyalty and sense of support from their employer. Number two is the depth of relationship with colleagues. So those are two huge things that we don't necessarily think about, because we're in the, trying to understand what it means to help the student learn, but the impact of that hope and resiliency coming from the adults in the building to each other and the relationships they're building and the depth of relationships and loyalty, those are the things that drive people out of buildings into other buildings and transfer. And so I think for me, as a principal leader, facilitating hope and resiliency with your staff, that's your creativity. Okay, because here's the genius of it all. The folks that do stay in education, because if half of all those teachers and educators say that it's not worth it, here are the ones that stay, according to that same research. The ones that stay have two characteristics. One is openness and the other is curiosity. How are you, as a leader, helping create the openness and curiosity of your own staff, right? And how do you create that culture where staff can be creative in addressing these issues? And so to me, those are things that we as leaders have to help facilitate in order to create a better culture.
So have you seen some good examples this year where we obviously had some fractured relationships out there, and I would say everybody wants to heal and move forward. Have you seen some good examples of everyone coming together and saying, this isn't right, let's get back on the right tracks together and do this together?
Yeah, there's actually some really good examples of that, and the reason why I know about these examples is because we have a $450,000 GPS grant to provide culturally responsive strategies around classroom management, and as almost a free or low cost PD for Washington State, and so CRS, culturally responsive strategies. And so there's been 3 districts that we've worked collaboratively with. One of them is Central Kitsap. And Central Kitsap, just like everybody else, they've had to bargain difficult contracts in order to create the best salary packages to keep our educators in the field. And so one of the things that I've seen with them is that they have entrusted their leadership to collaborate freely with the association president and also the WEA. And so what's that created is a 5-year plan. A 5-year plan of culturally responsive strategies district-wide. And so we've got the school board behind us, we've got the new transition. Think about this, you had a transition from a retiring superintendent to a new superintendent. You have the association there, you have the HR department, the PD department that are collaborating with you, and then you have your association staff and your classified personnel as well. So a 5-year plan with all those groups at the table, creating something that will not just check the box for cultural responsive strategies, but to truly create the culture. And what that's created is now we've got approximately 7 trainers in that school district that we have trained personally that are current members, like as a training cadre, and they've gone and they're training equity teams in the district-wide, and we're also doing building by building. So it's our first year, and I can tell you it's a model that we're going to have to really unpack, because there's so many good things that are coming from it. Because there's an empowerment of the staff to create equity teams, and I went to a meeting where they shared what they did based off of the trainings, the previous trainings that they received, including one of them was CRS, and they are now doing it on their own. And so to me, that's the kind of collaboration, and here's a great learning. That district, along with Spokane and Prosser and soon to be Marysville, we started the trainings first with principals. Because like you said, principals are key. We don't need to be perceived as a threat, and they don't need to be perceived as a threat to initiatives and things. Because if we know what's right, and that is building meaningful, caring adult relationships with students for the purpose of increasing hope and resiliency, that's what we're trying to do. And so we actually train the principals and admin first, so that they can kind of unpack it a little bit and filter it through their own initiatives, their PBIS, their AVID, so they see that this is not just another add-on, it's not another added stress, but it's another lens that actually makes the work that much more effective. And so I think that, to me, that's been a great collaboration. and it's starting to spread. Marysville and Spokane's been doing it already,
Right.
but it's a larger district, so there's a lot of different pieces that we have literally probably around 20 trainers out there from their own Spokane Education Association. And so we're going to do district-wide, but it's going to be building by building there. Marysville, we just met with them and with their senior leadership and their association president, and there's a lot of positive energy they're going to move forward from that. And so to me, those are some clear strategies to implement with intentionality and fidelity rather than just check the box.
Would it be great if we built the system around relationship building? Wouldn't that be crazy? Like time was built in the day for us adults to engage with kids that way.
Absolutely.
Let's switch gears.
Sure.
And talk about community.
Mm-hmm.
You know, principals are evaluated on engaging the community. It's one of the 8 criteria.
Mm-hmm.
Principals land in a new community they might not be familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
As you think about principal churn and all the leadership changes across the state, what are some key strategies that a principal could take to understand and become aware of their community and then ultimately engage at a deeper level and an authentic level with their community?
Sure. I think just unpacking the term community a little bit, that's one way back to that kind of that equity mindset and that culture responsive strategies mindset is if you're waiting for the community to come to you, you're going to get a certain community.
You mean the open house night that
Yes.
has 10% parents
Yes,
come to?
absolutely. And God bless them. I love the PTSA, and I think it's an amazing organization. But not everybody participates on the PTSA. Not everybody feels comfortable representing themselves on the PTSA, but they feel comfortable attending, you know, the local community-based organization, the local faith-based church or synagogue, right? The LGBTQ community groups, right? The advocacy groups. I think our job is to understand the different community-based organizations and try to get that marginalized voice, especially at the table. Because if we don't have that lens of equity to bring everybody as much as everybody to the table from the different social group categories that are in your school, then we're missing a critical voice. And so what we mean by that then is to actually come up with some key themes that you want to address. Like for us, again, Dr. Elaine Padish and myself, before we created the curriculum on culture responsive strategies, we actually went out to 5 different communities around Washington State to get feedback on what does it mean to have culture responsive classroom management. So we went to Monroe, Washington, Spokane, Washington, kind of Lakewood area, Kent, and then kind of the Des Moines Pack Highway near Midway Elementary School. So we just used that to hear what communities had to say about classroom discipline, and it was phenomenal. We learned so much. We already had a curriculum, but we changed it because we wanted to make sure that we built it with kind of a community perspective, and so we rebuilt it based off of their input. And so it was so much more relationship building versus just straight, again, we jump to skills first, but we want to make sure that we figure out our own awareness and knowledge first. And so that takes that relationship building first. And so that's why the community's really excited about that. I just met with Tacoma's NAACP Education Director, Johnson, is out there, and also Vibrant Schools. And I shared with them kind of the strategies of working with communities in the past, and they were really excited about possibly partnering on that as well, on some of those strategies where you build around this, like you said, you build around the relationships first. It's like, how do we do that? And it can be done. It definitely can be done.
Sweet. Great strategies. More importantly, great awareness.
Yeah, there you go. But it's, hey, you're learning. You're learning.
Let's pop over and talk about, and you've already talked about some of these things, but let's talk about the Staffel T. It's a term we like to use. here at AWSP because all the adults matter, and you've been hitting on this throughout this conversation, that it's every single adult who interacts with kids is super important. So we like to just eliminate this whole staff versus faculty, so we just say Staffel T. Obviously, awareness is crucial. So I'm a principal, I step into a building, I've got 150 staff members if I'm in a large high school, or I've got 30, and I'm elementary and anywhere in between. Where do I begin? How do I help that teacher that's been teaching there for 30 years, who's maybe thinking about retirement, and I come in and start talking about being a culturally responsive teacher? Where do I begin?
That's a really good question. I can give you examples of some staff. I won't use names just because I don't have permission. But
don't worry, this isn't being recorded.
Yeah, okay. All right,
kidding.
Thanks, I appreciate that. But I think as a leader, we want somebody that has a vision that we want to buy into. Because if you're just coming in and maintaining status quo, that's fine. But if you want us to bring out the best in ourselves, and by creating a culture that we want part of, to me, that's where I would want to go, is to a place that has an effective leader, somebody that has a vision that obviously has a focus around building relationships with students, right, for the purpose of increasing hope and resiliency and academic gains and learning, right, success. To me, I would want that leader to define success more than just we need to increase these test scores. Okay, we need interventions that are specific to these deficits that we see in our students and maybe even in your classroom, right? To me, that we all know that's there. I want to be able to believe in a leader that believes in me. And to me, if you believe in me, just like you're asking us to believe in our students, and when we believe in our students' ability to learn and succeed, and we say, I truly believe in you and you're authentic about it, that student's behavior changes. I honestly believe I've seen the same thing, because we're humans, where if you believe in me and you know that I have a gift and talent and you're going to put me in a place where I can succeed, you're going to utilize my talents and you're going to understand my talents, and you're also going to understand my weaknesses. Because if we're all honest, we're all weak. We all have we all have places of weaknesses. If you look at my desk, in comparison to your desk, that's how I structure things. That may be perceived as a weakness, but there's a huge strength that comes out of some of those imbalances. And so you're going to need to understand my strength and still believe in me, that I have a place in your culture and your organization, because you know the impact I have on kids, right? And to me, that's got to be the starting point. Because if you come in believing already in my deficits and you treat me that way, we don't want that for our students. Why do we accept that for our adults?
Yeah. It's great. We preach to all of our principals, don't go in there with the attitude of you're only going to be there for a few years. We say have a 5-10-year vision for your school, or else the adults won't come with you.
Absolutely. I think it can't just be also kind of a pie in the sky dream, right? I think it needs to be, the whole idea of realistic goals and those kinds of things are important. But a good example is one particular principal that I've seen and spoken with staff about, is that they said that this is the first principal they've seen with a vision, and they're willing to kind of work through some of the climate issues that have happened in the past, because they believe in this person's vision. They have such a heart for students, and now we want to transition that heart for students for a heart for staff, because the vision is so clear, and people want to be part of it, but they also want to be included within that vision as well, and to help shape it for that student impact. Because everybody wants to have that impact for that student. They want to buy into it, but you also have to buy into them.
So if you were to say to an audience full of principal prep candidates, they're just coming out, they get their certificate this year, they're heading into their first year of potentially leading a building or an assistant principal, what advice would you give to them as far as how to enter in to begin making those trust deposits, building the relationship, and the vision piece? Because you don't want them to jump in and say, I've got a pie in the sky vision, but they have to start somewhere. What advice would you give them as they enter in?
Well, I think, again, it's back to that same question of having that first conversation with staff, of getting to know the individual staff and what their own vision is, and what their own why is, and their vision of their, when are they the most effective, right? And find out those moments, and then integrate those personal visions into kind of evaluating what is yours, and how are you going to create a vision, a common vision for all of us that we believe in. And so it's getting to know kind of the needs of each individual staff, but also knowing their hidden talents as well, and then creating something that you know that they'll buy into, but bringing them with you. So part of it is actually, you know, having authentic representation at that leadership level, where I've seen, you know, building leadership teams where they're very connected to the staff, and they truly represent the staff voice and understanding, and that can be like, you know, a very good culture and climate there. But I've also seen building leadership teams where they don't represent staff, where it's not as effective because there's a breakdown in the communication as far as who's at the leadership level and how it gets down to the other staff, and how it's communicated. And so I think having representation of those different voices, of those well-respected voices from other colleagues, is really, really important. And I think part of that is gauging who those leaders are in your building, because sometimes the most effective leaders within the staff aren't the ones that are on that building leadership team, but they're the ones that people go to. So I think truly understanding who are the ones that represent the voices among the staff that will be able to get buy-in from the staff is really important to build those meaningful relationships with them.
Awesome. Shift gears again.
Sure.
And not that we're shifting gears to something that's not equally important, but let's talk students. So just because they're last doesn't mean we're not prioritizing them here in our conversation, but what are some examples you've seen out there of tangible strategies that principals have used to connect with kids, whether you've seen firsthand or whether you've experienced yourself, or you know, it's so easy for a principal to just get bogged down in the administration of the building that, you know, we constantly encourage connecting with kids.
Yeah.
So what are you seeing?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because that's one of the strategies that I think I forgot to share was celebrating the successes. I can guarantee that there are strategies implementing every single day, events every single day, and in classrooms all around Washington State. They're literally closing the opportunity achievement gaps. We don't publicize it enough. And so what we're doing is actually going and recording some of those events that are happening. And I went to a classroom of one of our trainers, Monacy, Cedar Green, and over in Puyallup. And I watched a group of first graders, gosh dang it, was it third? Well, anyways, it was primary. I think it was first grade. They ran their own classroom meeting. Okay, here it is, April, and she's invested time for the students to actually create classroom meetings for the purpose of helping them problem solve their own issues together. And she takes about 15 minutes each day. So I got to go out there and just record and watch, and I was blown away. They had 2 facilitators that prompted, what are some shout outs of just kind of shout outs of positivity that they've seen, and people were thanking, and it's called an appreciation circle, so they were sharing appreciation to other students. So seeing a first grader learn and appreciate somebody else's behavior and being shared around the table, right? And the ed staff are there too, around, and they're the ones that are kind of receiving the praise. And then they've went on to, more importantly, I think, not only the appreciation, but one young woman raised her hand when it was time to talk about issues and problems that they might have seen that they want resolved. And this young Asian girl said, people, when we were in our reading lit groups, people weren't listening to what I was saying, they were interrupting. So I couldn't finish my story. And so then the facilitator said, okay, that's great. Is this something that you just wanted to share, or are you asking for feedback or for solution? First grade. And she said solution. So immediately hands went up. So you had all these students, about 3 or 4 students shared specific things by saying, one young person said, you should tell them, excuse me, but I wasn't finished yet, and I feel like you're not listening. So I want to finish my story. So just being direct with them. And I was just like, wow. And response after response. And then then the facilitator said, which one do you want to try to do this week? Well, I want to try to do that one. Okay, great. Let's role play. So can I get a volunteer? So both of them stood up in the middle, and they role played what she would say. And to everything, I almost felt like it was scripted, but it was totally natural. And they walked away with a solution. And then the facilitator at the end said, okay, we will check on you in the next week to see how things are going. Blew my mind. And that was 15 minutes. That 15 minutes of time invested each day at elementary or at the middle school, it's 15 minutes at the end of the week, or even at a high school that we've seen. To me, that was a really amazing strategy of building meaningful relationships with students. But not only teacher to student, but student to student relationships. And so as a principal, we actually talked to the principal afterwards, and she basically has really promoted that strategy and also has allowed visitations in that classrooms. It's not, and I want to be cautious about being mandating it.
Right. I
think the idea of us facilitating opportunities to experiment in a safe space to where our colleagues could learn from that, to me, that's something that we're missing. That you should feel good about taking a risk and learning from both the successes and also the failures of it, and facilitating an opportunity to experiment and try new things. To me, that principle is representing the kind of leadership that they are doing behind the scenes, rather than saying, hey, we're told you have to do this. This is the way you do it. Versus, hey, let's try to pilot it. And WA is going to record it, right? And we're going to promote it in that manner. And so, to me, as a principal, building the student-student relationships is as effective as the teacher-to-student relationships. And so utilizing those students that already have kind of strong social-emotional learning skills, and giving them opportunities to share with students that may be struggling on social-emotional learning, because that's going to help the overall culture, because that's being promoted top-down, and believing in all students, believing that all kids are capable of success, no exceptions, right? If that's being promoted from the top, and it's being promoted to the staff member, that staff member is going to actually promote it to the students, and you watch the student-to-student relationships grow from that.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Sure.
You've got your school walkie-talkie, you're the principal.
Mm-hmm.
Secretary comes over the radio and says, hey, Ben, we don't have a substitute down in so-and-so's room. Mm-hmm. We need you to go there right now to cover the class. Mm-hmm. So you are now walking to the class, preparing your lesson plan in your head of how you're going to engage with kids. Mm-hmm. I used to look at that as an awesome opportunity.
Absolutely.
So what would you do the moment you walked in that room, Ben?
Well, I think the moment that I would walk in and I was asked, I would probably just do a quick assessment of where they are in their school day, as far as are they in the middle of a lesson plan or what's going on. But then I would somehow make sure that we would get ourselves into a conversation, and if they're doing classroom meetings, I would say, hey, we're going to do a quick classroom meeting today, and I want to see how things are going, right? And basically, if I was at the high school, because that's kind of where my comfort level is, I'd want to gauge this as a focus group, as hey, there's an opportunity from the principal. I want to hear from you. The strategy of these meetings happen all the time in our schools, in the classrooms. But if a principal went out and kind of truly gauged on what are some, what's going really well for you, and what's not. And maybe I'd break them up into groups of 3, so you don't get that silent death kind of in a round group. I'm thinking of 16 to 18-year-olds. But if they did in small groups, say, hey, what's working for you at our school, and what's not? And then collect that information as vital data, that whether to gauge your current climate and what you need to improve it, and then have them share with each other, and then do a quick jotting it down, say, I just thank you for your honesty. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that we need to know, because I did not know. So it's a part of it is, again, back to that cultural responses, the cultural competency piece of awareness and knowledge. It's like, you don't go in there assuming you know what to do for the kids, right? We want to garner them, their perspectives, their marginalized perspectives, because that's what we've been doing, and it's been phenomenal. We just went to Edmonds Woodway High School and just recorded students' responses to the culture and climate, and they're going to share that with their staff. Remarkable. I mean, they are the greatest observers of our bureaucracy.
Yeah.
They're the greatest observers of the lack of hope that's in our schools from their perspective. And we all have all the best intentions of increasing hope and resilience in our kids, and their faith in having a future after high school. But we don't necessarily listen to their feedback about what we're trying to build for them. So I think as a principal, we need to know that, because then we can share that with the staff and say, this is our why. Well, I've heard all of the whys that you have, and that's awesome, but there's a disconnect with your why and what the students are feeling and seeing. How do we bridge that together? Where's your creativity? Let's focus on your creativity and curiosity to bridge that.
Okay, we're almost there, time-wise.
All right.
So 2 last quick things, and I just want to speed round with you. If I asked you to throw into the camera some of the best resources that you've seen out there for somebody to engage at an entry level or take their learning deeper around becoming a culturally responsive leader, rattle off some of those resources. You don't have to go into descriptions of them. Just rattle them off so that people watching this video can go jump into Google.
Well, I'll do a couple shout outs to our own PD network. So the WAPD network, we have professional development training around some very effective areas. One is special education, one is evaluation, one is culturally responsive strategies, which is my department. We have one in national boards. So those are resources as a leader I'd want to know about, because they are accessible through the association to bring into your school. And so if you have questions about that's an amazing resource. The other newest resource that I would actually emphasize, we've got one person that we just brought in. His name's Dr. Anthony Muhammad, and he came in and just blew our socks off at our last Teaching Equity Conference. Our Teaching Equity Conference is yearly in April, and that's a resource as well, where you can bring in teams, and usually we have about 250 people, 300 plus people show up, and we're really trying to focus on how do we create that culture and climate in your building. And Dr. Anthony Muhammad has a new book on change, and it's a very eye-opening perspective. He shared bits and pieces of it during his 1.5 hour keynote, and so I'm looking at that as a resource because I think he's doing it right. I think what he talks about is we focus so much on the skill and technique, but the opposite of that is culture. that we got to focus on the culture and how we. The metaphor for that is, it's the seed. Like we focus so much on the seed, the technical skill of the seed. Like we want that seed to grow, but as important is what about the soil? Where's this? What's the soil? Will this seed ever grow in this kind of soil? Right. So we got to cultivate that soil in order for true change to occur. And so that soil is your staff culture, that is your building culture. And we're so focused on, let's buy the next iPad, let's buy the next program, let's buy this and that, and invest in these seeds. But if you're not dealing with the soil of it, then that seed's not going to grow. So I think that's a great that book. It's called Change. Dr. Anthony Muhammad is another
it's great, valuable resource. Great resource. So. And you and I have talked before about, wouldn't it be great if that was a teaching and leading equity conference, and AWSP and WA did that together? We just planting seeds.
Yeah, absolutely. I see some opportunities there as well.
All right, last question for you, and then we'll get you out of here. Mm-hmm. Nobody comes into the studio without this question, and it is, can you think of a favorite principal when you look back through your K-12 experience, a favorite principal in your life, who that was, and why they stand out to you?
Okay, I was at Cascade Middle School. He was a middle school associate principal, vice principal. His name was Mr. Priest, and he was a little balding on the top, like many of our principals. And we were taught to, fear our principals. As a young immigrant, you respect your administrators. You just listen to what they say, and you just follow the rules and so on. Well, when I went to Cascade, Mr. Priest always had a smile on his face. He was always warm and friendly and just kind of jovial, and he was uplifting. And that I'd never seen before. And so it's like, what? You mean administrators actually have a sense of joy? And that was my first, he broke the mold of my previous elementary school principal, who was just all this, and we just followed the rules, and it was fear-based and things like that. Because I almost got a SWAT in that school, back when SWATs were, legal. But Mr. Priest, and I wanted to follow the rules because I wanted him to smile, not because of the punishment.
Right on.
I wanted him to smile, and so that's a different type of relational strategy, I guess, to wanting students to follow rules, is to you engage them, you make them smile. And I think I prefer that even to this day.
Right on. Well, Ben, we can't thank you enough for coming today. Mm-hmm. As you were listing off those resources, you were humble not to say Ben Ibale is a great resource. So I'm hoping principals reach out to you as somebody that can come work with you on developing that culture that's ideal for our schools. So thank you for your work at WA. Thank you for your work across the state. Thank you for your work with Kids at Hope and the impact you're having there. And let's keep partnering.
All right. Thanks.
That's it from all of us here at AWSP TV Studios. Ben Ibale from WA. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.